and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads. I do not have as many books to talk about. As I may have mentioned a few times, playing The Sims more, listening to less audiobooks, trying to bump that up. I'm gonna see if I can adjust this. Okay, so I don't know what about my setup changed, but I wanted to get the wall out of the picture. I've read less, and some were really strong. Not amazing like last week, but they were still really strong. Others, well, just one specifically really wasn't as strong and was a book that made me question a few things. So let's get into it. So I was going to start off by talking about this book because I thought I read it after last week's Recent Reads, but then I remembered after prepping all my books that I did talk about this last week, so I'm not going to talk about it again. Now we get into the books, and there's actually only 3 to talk about. Yes, I was reading less books. The first of those is the audiobook. One of the audiobooks. Actually, I just realized that the reason there's only 3 here is because I do not have one of them physically, and that was one of the audiobooks that I was listening to, and actually was a really strong book, and that is Invisible Women, and I think it's Caroline Criado Perez, if I remember the author's name right. There will be an image probably on this side to verify whether or not I got that right. But Invisible Women is an academic look at how women are portrayed, or more often not portrayed, in data. And Perez looks at a bunch of different areas. There's different stories that I've heard in other podcasts, other books, but you know, some of those are anything from the fact that car manufacturers do not use, or hadn't used, crash dummies in the shape of a woman. And so seatbelts did not help a woman, and because to make things comfortable for a woman, it didn't keep them as safe. There were other things like, I'm forgetting all of the details, but just different things where the default went to the man, the male body, the male experience. And in being gender neutral, what you're actually doing is making things male. And I thought of an example that I don't think that she talked about in here, but it's something interesting to look at. When I sign up for races, more often than not, I don't get the shirt, but I especially will not get the race shirt if all they offer is unisex, because unisex, in the name, it should fit both men and women. No, those style shirts never look good on the female body. So is it actually unisex? No, it's styled off the male figure, whatever you're thinking there. And there were a lot of things that I learned that were reinforced that I knew before. And this is a solid book that more people need to read, and more people need to advocate for change, for something better with this. The other audiobook that I read this week, that I finished on Saturday, started another one but haven't finished that one yet, is one that I was hoping for a lot better out of. And that is Out of Darkness by Ashley Hope Perez. This book, it's a Printz Award winner, which is an award for young adult literature. And I think besides the fact that the main characters are in the young adult age range, they are in high school, that's the only thing that really seems young adult in this book. There's so much in here that it's just too much. I would never recommend this to a young adult reader. I don't think I'd actually recommend it to anyone. And before I get into why, I do want to say that the actual craft of the novel is phenomenal. The character development, the plot development, the structure, the world. I mean, it's based on a real story. Well, an impetus and then fictionalized around it. But the world that she created for her characters to live in and embody, it was so visceral and so well done. I don't think I've ever read a book that is so structurally sound, craft-wise, on just about everything across the board. that I have disliked, and a book that has made me gag so much. And I wonder if it would be the same if I read something like A Little Life. And so that gives you a little bit of insight into why I don't like this book. So the real life event that this is framed around is a real life explosion at a school in East Texas, an oil town. And this really happened, and they didn't know how to keep the gas lines safe for powering the school. And because of that, there was a tragic explosion that killed so many children. And that is the real life event that Perez takes and builds her story around it. You have Wash, who's one of the main characters. He is an African-American boy who lives in that area. His father is the superintendent of the colored school. He's sort of like bucking up against the things that are required of him so that he survives in this town. And then you have Naomi, who grew up in, I think it was San Antonio. Her mother was married twice. Her first husband died tragically, and her first husband was Naomi's father when Naomi was about 6 years old. Then she remarries this guy who is another character in here, who is, I can't even think about him, which is like, ooh. Anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. She remarries this guy, but she has miscarriage after miscarriage, and the doctors say, don't get pregnant again. Her husband can't stop, and so she gets pregnant again, has twins, and dies. Husband, now widower, takes off, abandons his kids and his stepdaughter, and they are raised by their grandparents. But then at the outset of the book, he gets saved, and the pastor says you need to reunite your family. In Henry, the stepdad's mind, that just means his twins. But they come as a package deal. Naomi has to come. The stepdad is an absolutely despicable character. And one of the things that bothered me so much in here is the fact that we get perspectives from him. I am not going to go into some of the things that he's thinking about in here. It's disgusting. And I know that people like this really exist. But for the sake of the story, we did not need his perspective. Completely unnecessary. And then at the end, the way that the plot moves is just trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. One of the characters at the end, who so many things are experienced around him and to him by the people he loves. He loses people that he loves, and he's the last one left. And it just, especially in that last bit, I'm like, this child is like 8, 9 years old, and he's experiencing all of these. How was he supposed to be a functional human being at the end of this? Just that last bit where all of the characters are coming together, and it just is trauma piled on trauma, trauma multiplying trauma. All the bad things that you can think of are in here. And I just, as I was listening to this, finishing this up, I'm just like, why did you have to put everything in here? I understand you wanting to tell the story of all of this negative stuff, the stuff that happens with racism, the stuff that happened to those of Mexican descent, the trauma with the school, the difficulties with the stepdad aspect, not even going to mention it. All of those stories, they need to be told. But did they all have to happen at once, all together? Do we have to pile everything in here? And I just don't think that's the case. Even though we're at the very beginning of September, I have a feeling that this is going to be one of my worst books of the month because of my experience, not because of the quality of the book, again. And that's what makes this so difficult to talk about. Then we go to one that was much more lighthearted. I actually finished it before I finished Out of Darkness, but I read it mostly through the week, and that is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This book is gorgeous. Not just the artwork, which is phenomenal, but the story itself and the way that Sanderson weaves together these two different sides of the narrative where you think that you are on two different worlds and you have people coming together. I'm not going to get into spoilers at all in here, but the way that this story is told and the magic system unfolds and things are starting to be told and revealed, especially towards the end. There's the reveal after reveal, and now that I'm thinking about it, that's characteristic of Sanderson, you know, his Sanderlinch. He does it so well in this book. I really enjoyed both Yumi and Painter, Nikaro, but he goes by Painter. Both of these main characters had to undergo so much transformation throughout this, and Sanderson does a really good job of it. And on top of that, the illustrations are top notch. I am so glad that I backed the Kickstarter, because this is one of the most gorgeous books I have ever owned. And then we get to the last book that I read in the week, and that is one of my SEASL books, You'd Be Home Now. I think that this is an example of how you talk about difficult things without dumping the trauma, because there were a lot of difficult things that happened in this. And I will say I was a little wary before I went into this, because previous books that I've read that deal with the opioid epidemic, they've gone down a road that so many have gone down before, and it's not really one that I feel is productive. Like, do those character journeys happen in real life? Yes, but it's been done so many times before. This book, Glasgow took a very, in my opinion, unique take on the opioid crisis and the addiction crisis, because you have a main character, Emmy or Emery, who is the youngest out of three. She's always lived in her sister's shadow, her sister who's in college. She was academically gifted. She was super attractive. And then you have her older brother, who is only a year older than her, and he gets involved in not so great things. And he gets addicted. And at the beginning of this summer, before her junior year, his senior year, they're in an accident. They're on their way home from a party, and the driver is just driving too fast. Really bad road conditions. He's not a great guy either. So they get into a wreck. It's not exactly 100% clear to me how this happens, but something about her brother's body and how it lands on this other girl that they were taking home he ends up walking away scot-free, injury-wise, but the girl dies. The driver ends up going to juvie, and Emmy herself, it shatters her kneecap or breaks her kneecap, and she has to go through rehab. On top of that, their family is very rich. Their family founded the mill that brought all the wealth to this town, and so she has a lot of things piling up on her. Her brother has to go off to rehab, and she also really has a crush on the guy next door. He says he wants to keep it secret, and I'm like, oh no, that's not gonna end well. And so we go through the year, and she's dealing with all of that, her brother coming home. She's got needs herself, and she never seems to be seen. And in a way to fix those, and as a cry for help, she's a little bit of a kleptomaniac. Not frequent, but a little bit. There's things that happen with that other guy, not a great guy at all. And the way that the story unfolds and the way that her brother deals with the addiction, it's dealt with in such a true, realistic way, but not so that you are face first in the trauma. It's dealt with in a way that helps you understand. And I don't know how to describe that exactly, but there's just so much of this book that was so well done. This is definitely something that I would highly recommend for high school students, young adults. I loved this book. I thought, not because of the, loved as in I loved and appreciated the experience, not because it was a pleasant topic. So there you go. There you have the 4 books that I read this week. A mixed bag, not too mixed bag. Structurally, all of these books, craft-wise, they were all phenomenal. One really disappointed and left a kind of negative note on my rating for this week, but the rest of them were really strong. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.